Have you ever seen this fisherman painting? If you have any connection to pretty much this area, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Germany, the Netherlands, you probably have seen it because it's probably hanging in your parents' apartment or in your grandparents' house. And I bet you didn't know it has a bit of a connection to Hitler. But I'll get to that later. My grandparents had this fisherman on the wall in their apartment in Norway. And come to think of it, I was just talking about my dad's parents, but I'm pretty sure my mom's parents had this painting on the wall too. I saw it in a bunch of homes as a kid, or some variation of it, because this thing comes in many editions by many artists. In Norway, most people believe it depicts an archetypal Norwegian fisherman gazing long into the North Sea. In Denmark, they're convinced he's Danish, and in Sweden, they see him as obviously Swedish. Frequently, people across the Nordic region will proudly claim this painting actually depicts their grandpa or some other ancestor. In a 2020 radio interview that got kind of an extension in 2024, a Swede named Fredrik Björkman, who runs his own little museum in his garage collecting variations of the fisherman painting, refers to the picture as part of the Swedish wallpaper or tapestry. I think one could say the same thing in any Nordic country. But at least according to Wikipedia and a bunch of other sources, the fisherman is actually Dutch and the painter was German. Harry Herondel is perhaps not considered a great artist, but he left an indelible mark. This painting is known to a lot of people, even if most art critics would call it a typical piece of kitsch. It's called Der alte Seebär, which I'm probably slightly mispronouncing, but it literally translates to the old sea bear, and it was painted sometime around the late 1930s. Oh, and it's supposedly not actually a fisherman either. Apparently the man depicted is Doris Rijkers, a famous Dutch lifeboat captain who saved around 500 people's lives over a total of 38 rescue operations. So, not a fisherman, but when he was quite young, he did marry a fisherman's widow who had a bunch of children, the oldest of whom had a kid of her own, and so I guess people started calling him Grandpa already when he was 23. And he kind of took on that role and identity in his local community, even in terms of how he dressed and everything. Supposedly when he died, he was the most popular person in the Netherlands, and his funeral was almost a royal affair. A bunch of streets are named after him, and there's even a National Rescue Museum in the Netherlands that has baked his name into theirs. But hold on a minute. It appears the Dutch are just as wrong about this painting as the Norwegians and the Swedes and the Danes and everyone else is. Doris Rijkers is not the subject of the fisherman painting, and the painting actually is of a fisherman. I'll get to the details on this in just a bit, as well as that uncomfortable Hitler connection. But first, let's talk about how this painting spread so far and wide. Doing some reading about all of this, it's not that easy to figure out how this one relatively innocuous image becomes almost common property across so many countries. Although maybe the answer is exactly that. It's innocuous, it's romantic, and it's even somehow patriotic, regardless of what seafaring nation you're in. The man I mentioned earlier, Fredrik Björkman, speculates well about how prints and replicas of this painting spread so effectively. Reproduction rights to the painting were sold to a German publisher in 1940. Cheap reproductions of the painting started showing up in popular Swedish mail-order catalogs in the 50s. I'm guessing the same is true in other Nordic countries, and I'm also guessing there weren't a ton of other paintings one could buy so easily. Björkman thinks that once it's in maybe 10,000 homes, people start seeing it around and it becomes almost a stand-in for the concept of art. So when people are decorating their homes, they know that there's supposed to be a painting on the wall, but maybe they can't afford a unique piece of art, and maybe they don't have any real interest in developing a personal taste in art. And so then it's super easy to just buy one of these things they've seen around for like $20, hang it on the wall, and then it's like, okay, cool, I have art now. It's like the default choice, kind of like how people put letters in their kitchens that say, eat. But an interesting thing has happened. While the fisherman painting used to be all over flea markets and garage sales available for barely any money, it has to some degree become almost a collector's item now that people want, maybe ironically. It's like people want to hang it on their wall while winking now. And I'm certainly not saying that these things have become truly expensive or rare, but most of the time you'll probably end up paying many times what it would have cost you a couple of decades ago. I've lived in New York for my entire adult life, but as a teenager in Norway, I used to watch the talk show of a wildly irreverent Swedish journalist named Robert Aschberg. And in reading about the fisherman, I discovered to my delight that Aschberg used to own over 400 versions of this painting. He auctioned off his collection for charity, but he says that he kept 30 or so of the most grotesque ones, which I thought was kind of funny. The fisherman is someone to lean on when a storm is brewing, according to Aschberg. And it's true, there is something very comforting and reassuring about this portrait. But let's take that dark turn now to somewhere much less comfortable. Fredrik Björkman, the fisherman painting garage museum owner, worked with a researcher named Stefan Gemzell, who discovered in the Library of Congress, I believe, 3 copyright entries for Harry Harandel paintings or prints, dated 1941. One of them is for our beloved fisherman. The 2 others are portraits of Hitler. Harandel's family claims that those, along with one of Hermann Goering, were commissioned and painted against his will, that he would have been shot if he didn't do it. Regardless, it's pretty eerie to see how similar this is to the fisherman portrait. It's like they were painted according to the same template. Anyway, I mentioned earlier that the fisherman is not in fact a painting of Dorus Rijkers, the Dutch lifeboat captain. There's very little information online about Harry Harandel, so little in fact that Stefan Gemzell, the researcher, started doubting that he was even the true painter of the fisherman. But eventually Gemzell and Fredrik Björkman were able to get in touch with and visit Harry Harandel's family, including his son, who is also named Harry Harandel. Harry the Younger was able to share what one has to believe is the true story of the fisherman painting. His dad was walking around the harbor in a town not far from Hamburg, happened to see a fisherman that he thought had a character-rich face, and asked if he could paint him. And the fisherman said no. He was absolutely not interested in that. He didn't want to be painted. But Harandel insisted, and eventually the fisherman agreed to have his portrait painted in exchange for 20 German marks. His name was Captain Meyer. Harry Harandel Jr. dug up a 1982 local German newspaper article that interviewed his father towards the end of his life, where he confirms this story. Björkman was able to buy the original fisherman painting from Harry Harandel's son, who was over 90 years old at the time of their meeting. Or at least it's one of the original paintings, because apparently he painted a whole bunch of them. It's not known what Fredrik paid for it, and he doesn't want to say, but Swedish art expert Claes Moser estimates the value of the original painting may be in the $1,000 to $2,000 range, which I thought was just like crazy low. I mean, I know that this isn't some highly regarded, high art painting or like a super respected work of art, but surely the mind share that this image has means that somebody somewhere is willing to pay a lot more for this thing, I would think. Either way, it's certainly an image that has far outlived anyone's expectations and found this amazing life across so many countries. Definitely comment below if this painting has been part of your life somehow. It's a picture that's been kind of seared into the visual imaginations of so many people, including other artists. There's a Dutch contemporary artist named Rob Schulte who loves the kitsch fisherman motif and did a project where he bought about 40 sewn replicas at flea markets and then mounted them in frames, but backwards, so that the viewer can see the back of the pieces, revealing the tied knots and loose threads and everything, basically showing the craft and workmanship of whoever made them. I think this really speaks to how this image really is part of our common tapestry. And back in the 70s, a Norwegian-Swedish underground artist named Kjartan Slettemark was the model for a hyper-realistic print by the Swedish self-taught artist Sture Johannesson. This masterpiece is called Michelangelo. I'm sure there must be a bunch of other examples as well of contemporary artists playing around with this 100-year-old image that has such a pervasive presence in so many Nordic minds. Here's my quick attempt. He's got kind of an awkward nose and an uneven eyes, but hey, I guess not everyone can make a work of art that's going to be welcomed into hundreds of thousands of people's homes. Thanks for watching.